Professor Anefi, please come up stage. Dr. Agri Daku, please come up stage. Mrs. Adelaide Anokumi, please come up stage. The IOM Chief of Mission, Ghana, Togo, and Benin, Mrs. Fatu Ndiaye Diallo, please come up stage. Dr. Faustina Frimpong-Ingwa, please come up stage. Once again, you are all welcome to today's release on the thematic report on migration. We will start our program with an opening prayer. So we call upon Mr. Timothy Afo to usher us into the program with a word of prayer.
Finally, Timothy Afo, come up stage. Please, let's be upstanding. Let's pray. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 18, the Bible says, in all things, give thanks to the Lord, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for our lives. Father, we thank you for this morning in the name of Jesus. We thank you how far you've brought GSS. Last year, we programmed in our heart to release 40 publications, and this year with purpose in our spirit, in our heart, that we're going to release 86. Today being the 7th one, we ask for your wisdom, we ask for your knowledge, we ask for your grace, we pray for precision of words, and we pray that clarity of speech during the time of presentation. We pray that at the end of the day, we are going to trigger discussions in regards to migration, and I believe that by the time we finish, your name will be glorified. We thank you and we bless you. In Jesus' name, amen. Please resume your seat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Timothy Afo. And in programs like this, we'll surely need somebody to chair the occasion for us. So I'll call upon Ms. Barbara Saki, an Assistant Program Officer with the Ministry of Interior, to introduce to us the chairperson for the program.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Barbara Saki, and I'm honored to introduce to you the chairperson for today's event. She is a lawyer by profession and a member of the Ghana Bar Association. She has served on several boards and committees and is currently a member of the Narcotics Control Commission Board, Ghana Immigration Service Board, National Lottery Authority Board, and the Ghana Highway Authority Board. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science and Religion certificate, a diploma in Public Administration, and a certificate in Women Empowerment. She also holds an Executive Master's in Consultancy and Project Management. She has won several awards, and notable amongst them are the Nathan Quao Leadership Award 2020 and also the Most Influential Civil Servant Award in 2016. She is an advocate for women empowerment, child development, and other security-related issues, and also lectures on domestic issues to the Women's Fellowship as well as the Youth Fellowship in her church. She is presently the Chief Director of the Ministry of the Interior and has held this position since July 2014. Ladies and gentlemen, with a round of applause, can we welcome our chairperson, Mrs. Adelaide Pinaman Ano Kumi. Distinguished guest, your chairperson for today, Madam.
Thank you very much for this elaborate introduction. I think that if I had the opportunity to censor what she wrote, I would have deciphered and brought it down to the barest minimum. Thank you very much. Since she highlighted that I'm an advocate of women empowerment, I wish to take this opportunity to congratulate women for celebrating the International Women's Day yesterday. Are you cool, women? The governing board of the Ghana Statistical Service, the government statistician, the deputy government statistician, the chief of mission IOM, directors of MDAs. I see a lot of professors on the high table, professors present here, development partners, directors and staff of the Ghana Statistical Service, our friends from the media, distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. May I please crave your indulgence to call to order the launch of the 2021 Population and Housing Census PAC Thematic Report on Migration. First of all, I want to thank you all for leaving your busy schedules and other assignments to attend the ceremony for the launch of the PAC Thematic Report on Migration. I also wish to thank the International Organization for Migration Ghana for providing funds for the development of this report. Let me also use this opportunity to congratulate the government statistician and his team of experts from the Ghana Statistical Service for the publication of several reports emanating for the 2021 Population and Housing Census. Ladies and gentlemen, the government of Ghana, having recognized the importance of migration management, launched the first migration policy document for Ghana on 26th of April 2016. In that policy document, some sections discuss migration management as it relates to data and analysis. It is in the spirit of providing data that led to the drafting of the thematic report on migration to provide comprehensive information on migration in Ghana, including sex disaggregation, characteristics of households, the reasons for migration, migration patterns, both internal and external, amongst others. Ladies and gentlemen, the Ministry of Interior congratulates the Ghana Statistical Service for the 2021 Population and Housing Census data on migration, as it provides data for the basis for planning, implementation, monitoring and evaluating, and analyzing the needs of the population within the context of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs 10.7. We commend the Ghana Statistical Service for their efforts to engage stakeholders in order to promote the uptake of the census data for decision making. The Ministry of Interior counts so much on the rich data emanating from the 2021 Population and Housing Census to address issues relating to migration in the country and to move forward with our sectorial policies and programs. Ladies and gentlemen, the preparation of a thematic report on migration using the 2021 Population and Housing Census data will form the basis of migration statistics, which would inform the harmonized and improving statistics in the West Africa project, as well as the 5-year corporate plan of the Ghana Statistical Service. This report will update the current series of reliable and comprehensive set of data on migration. These major national and international frameworks are heavily dependent on the development of a strong statistical base for the successful implementation and effective monitoring, which will serve as the foundation and the means for migration management. The report will present statistics on the place of birth, duration of stay in a current residence, main reason for moving, usual residence within the last 5 years, age, sex, nationality, ethnicity, religion, marital status, immigration, former household members, native born, foreign born, literacy status, language of literacy, economic activity, hours of work, current school attendance, educational attainment, industry occupation, employment status, employment sector, ICT, housing and living conditions of migrants. Ladies and gentlemen, this report was produced by a cross-cutting team of writers composed of a team leader from the academia, 2 subject experts from Ghana Statistical Service, a policymaker, as well as a senior researcher from the Ministry of Interior. The writers of this policy document worked closely with a team of reviewers of diverse backgrounds and the Ghana Statistical Service management to ensure that the report are of high quality. Following this launch, the Ministry of Interior will engage further with the Ghana Statistical Service on the production of analytical reports that will seek to answer policy-relevant research questions on migration. We are also interested in contextualizing the available statistics and working to explain the patterns and trends presented today. We will continue to collaborate with the Ghana Statistical Service and the relevant stakeholders to ensure the effective utilization of the census data for the required policy development. I urge all stakeholders, especially the media, civil society and organization, and all users of statistical data to support the Ghana Statistical Services efforts to ensure effective dissemination of the information on the 2021 Population and Housing Census data widely. We will rely on the media to break down the information so as to appeal to the general public. Ladies and gentlemen, I accept the responsibility to chair this lunch. Thank you for your attention, and God bless you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We'll call upon Professor Samuel Kobneni to welcome us to this program.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, thank you for accepting the responsibility to chair the program for Board and Management of Ghana Statistical Service. Secondly, permit me for the elaborate introduction that you gave, given the personalities that we have for the launch of the thematic report on migration. However, I'll proceed and do selective identification of other people who are supporting the work of Ghana Statistical Service by recognizing the presence of the United Nations Population Fund, who is specifically supporting us in the writing of other thematic reports. So if UNFPA, we can see you. Thank you for availing yourself. Chair and distinguished members on the panel, I would also want to acknowledge the presence of the Ministry of Tourism and Arts and Culture. The reason is that migration is very much linked to it, and going into my welcome address, I'll touch on some of the work that we are doing with the Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture. So can we see the ministry? Thank you very much. So distinguished ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for availing yourself for this lunch. I'm particularly excited for two reasons. The second is minor, but the second one is the fact that in the last 18 months, today marks the 17th release of the 2021 Population and Housing Census exercise. So averagely, we are doing just about one publication each month as far as the 2021 Population and Housing Census is concerned. And this is something that leads us to the fight that GSS is pursuing to ensure that data is integrated with policy. Chair, the second reason is that today I'm a listener and I'm not a presenter. So it gets me to hear from our seasoned lead author, Professor Nefi, while we look at how GSS can continue to strengthen its collaboration with academia and other stakeholders within the data collection space. In terms of substance, I want to proceed with the scope of the census exercise, especially for our media colleagues, to carry this message in its right context. We always say that census is a 10-year activity and it's a national activity. The results that we're going to present today are based on data that was collected using 28 June as the census night and different reference periods for the data that we collected. We call it a 10-year exercise because the data that we collect are based on variables that we say they are very slow changing variables. They are basically our living conditions, so they do not change rapidly as other economic variables. So over the 10-year period, these variables continue to be relevant to inform our policy and to see how things change. So although the data was collected about 18 months ago, its relevance still is there. This is important because one of the reasons why we do censuses is to highlight certain areas that will require deeper analysis during the intercensus period. That is why between 2021 and 2030, we will be running a number of surveys. Ghana Statistical Service, and for that matter, Ghana as a country, has not been fortunate to do a nationally representative stand-alone study on migration. So what we seek to do in this presentation are two things. Highlight the characteristics, the status of migration in this country, and also point to areas that will require that we as a country focus on why we need deeper studies around issues on migration. Chairperson, I did indicate that within the enclave of migration, Ghana Statistical Service is collaborating with other institutions, particularly the Ghana Immigration Service, the Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture, and doing things in the enclave of migration, one of which is issues around travelers, another is issues around tourism. So hopefully in the next month or so, we'll be releasing results around the Ghana International Travelers exercise to inform us on the flow of traveling and related expenditure. We are in the field collecting data on domestic and outbound tourism, also related to the issue of migration and also related to the issue of tourism. So we are positioning Ghana Statistical Service as a pivotal institution agency to supply all the other ministries of the relevant data that is needed. So what we're going to do here is to incite policymakers, government, to push for what we're now calling integrating statistical targets in policy documents. Chair, last week we met as the National Statistics Advisory Committee, and we did indicate to the 25-member committee the need of integrating statistical targets from three perspectives. We have focused on statistical targets as measuring the outcome of what we've done. that is not very helpful. If we really want to use statistics to inform our policy, we need to use statistics ex ante during the policy design, and that is why we've taken up the responsibility to profile all policies that we have in the country and to see whether they have statistical targets in there and how relevant are those statistical targets, how accurate are those statistical targets. And during the implementation of the policies, we monitor how statistics is being used to monitor the progress that we are making across the different ministries. And as an ex post measure, we see how statistics is informing us on whether we reach our target or not. This is what is making us refocus our efforts going into 2023 and beyond. Chairperson, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to production of data, Ghana Statistical Service in the last 5 years has moved the frontiers of data production. What we see clearly missing is the issue of data utilization. And that is where we want to refocus our efforts to ensure that our work does not end with dissemination. Our work ends with when we see data properly integrated in the three phases that I talked about earlier on. So Chairperson would want to work closely with the Ministry of Interior and all the other allied ministries to ensure that all the figures that we're going to see here will be put in its right context. We might see numbers that in some of our minds we might think is negligible, but let us never forget the leave no one behind agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals. So instead of putting out percentages only, we always put out the percentages with the numbers, because our focus is to make sure everybody is boarded on every program that we have in the country, keeping in mind the leave no one behind agenda. We very much appreciate the collaboration that we've had with the International Organization on Migration. We are hoping that, Chairperson, as you said, as quickly as possible, we're going to get into the analytical report and also continue to encourage all other policymakers to make great use of our data. I'll conclude by saying that we're going to increase the average 1 month, 1 publication target to about 2 in the coming months. So let's look out for the publications that we're going to put out in the next 3 weeks. In the next 3 weeks, we're going to have a publication on infant and under 5 mortality differentials in Ghana. We're going to have a publication on dimensions of gender disparities in Ghana. And thirdly, we're going to have a publication on persons with difficulty in performing activities. All this will be data that will be coming from the 2021 Population and Housing Census. And our goal is to get all these 3 disseminated by 31st March 2023. We thank you all for availing yourself, and we look forward to working with you throughout the journey to ensure that Ghana is a statistics community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. I'll call upon Madam Fatu Ndiaye Diallo to kindly give us a statement.
Good morning. The government of the statistician, Professor Samuel Ane, the Chief Director for the Ministry of Interior, Mrs. Adelaide Anokumi, my dear sister, development partners, colleagues from the UN. I'm very happy to see that the UNFPA is around. The media, ladies and gentlemen, I bring you my compliments from the International Organization for Migration and welcome you all to the launch of the National Migration Thematic Report this morning. The first thematic report to be launched from the 2021 Census. Madam Chairperson, permit me to express my sincerest appreciation to the government statistician, Professor Anim, for the excellent cooperation, to Professor Anarfi and the report drafting team for the dedication and commitment to duty, as well as our donor, the IOM Development Fund, for this report. Ladies and gentlemen, Ghana requires up-to-date migration data to facilitate reporting and evidence-based policymaking as a country of origin, transit, and destination. While this has been identified as a key need by the government of Ghana through the national migration policy, the achievement of this goal has been proven to be a challenge. In addressing this gap, the IOM Development Fund in 2019 supported the mainstreaming of migration into the national census to contribute to collecting, analyzing, and disseminating reliable and up-to-date data on migration and migration patterns in Ghana, providing a basis for evidence-based policymaking in line with the SDG 17 of the 2030 agenda for the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as Objective 1 of the GCM on migration data. Through the project, the GSS trained 324 enumerators in the Bono region as part of the national training of trainers for the 2021 population and housing census. The trainers supported cascading training for enumerators in administering the census questionnaire. Further, 38 migration data focal points at ministries responsible for collecting administrative migration data, such as records of entry and exit into the country, work permits, resident permits, and data on diaspora population from the various Ghanaian mission abroad benefited from training organized in September 2021. As a result of this initiative, 9 government agencies are now sharing administrative migration data with the GSS. Ladies and gentlemen, the call for improved migration statistics has gained currency in recent years, given that data is critical to tracking progress on the SDGs, as well as monitoring the 23 sets of objectives of the Global Compact on Migration, for which Ghana is a champion country. The thematic report on migration, therefore, provides the very much needed data to interrogate the state of play of migration in Ghana to inform the right policy engineering. Additionally, the data will support the review of the migration profile of Ghana. Madam Chairperson, I want to reiterate the International Organization for Migration commitment to supporting the Ghana Statistical Service in improving migration statistics for development. Through our new project, the EU-UN Building Migration Partnership Project, which I had the opportunity to launch with Madam Chief of Director of the Ministry of the Interior and the UN Resident Coordinator recently. IOM will continue to support the building of the capacity of officials for effective management of migration in Ghana. Ladies and gentlemen, your feedback today on the thematic report will enrich the report and ensure it reflects the state of play of migration in Ghana. So let's discuss and ask all the relevant questions to ensure the reports reflect the data needs of Ghana. Let me finish by saying that nothing can be achieved without data. Data is essential to leave no one behind in Ghana and around the world. By then, I will thank you for your attention and wish you a sweet, very fruitful discussion around this thematic today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. I want to remind ourselves that we are here for the release of the thematic report on migration. So we call upon Professor John A. Anefi to present to us the findings from the report.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want my hands to be free. Yeah. Madam Chair, distinguished ladies and gentlemen on the high table, ladies and gentlemen, I am privileged to be here this morning to present the findings of the results on migration from the 2021 Population and Housing Census. This will be the format of the presentation. We begin with an introduction and end with some conclusion. Good. So, by way of introduction, migration is one of the components of population change. And we know that the others are fertility and mortality. Fertility, birth rate; mortality, death rate. So it is a combination of these three which determine a change in population, whether the population will increase or decrease. But let me add that among the three, migration is the most complex because it is like water. It does not find its level very, very easily. It has to be contained, as it were. And particularly with respect to Ghana, migration has played an integral role in the development of the country. And it continues to play an integral role in Ghana's development. And so it is important for both the individual as well as the nation. You cannot take migration out of anything. You cannot tell the history of Ghana's migration without referring to Ghana's development, without referring to migration. The migration of people from the northern part of the country to the south and from other regions within the sub-region. And it is for this reason that the United Nations has found it necessary to insist that nations include some aspects of migration in their census undertakings. And so since 1960, as a nation, we have been including migration questions in all our census undertakings. What has been happening is that we keep updating the kind of information that we seek from the censuses. And remember, census is a huge undertaking, so you cannot overload it with too many questions. So there is a limitation in that area. So our main objective of this report is to describe, as Professor Enim said, analyze and provide some explanation for patterns. I say some because census data is such that it can't afford you the opportunity to give too many explanations, because by the nature of the exercise, it collects certain basic information only and does not go deeply into the whys and hows of issues. So let me start with a few definitions to help us to be able to focus on the presentation. When we talk of migration, it is about the movement of people in space, often involving a change in the usual place of residence. In space means moving from one place to the other. So that is why we say migration has within it elements of time, space and time. Somebody has to cover some space, move from one place to the other. And that person must spend a certain amount of time in the new area before his movement could be classified as migration. So we say that migration is a kind of movement, but not all movements could be classified as migration. The movement must satisfy certain criteria, and basically they are distance and duration. So in the 2021 PAC, we set as our duration 12 months for both internal and international migration. If somebody has moved into an area, the person should have lived there not less than 12 months before we could classify that person as having migrated. But let me add that until, oh my God, which one is the culprit? Is it this one or that one? Until the last census, the duration of stay until one could be classified as a migrant was 6 months. So from this, a migrant is a person whose place of birth was different from the place of enumeration during the 2021 census. And so an immigrant is a person born in Ghana who has traveled outside for more than 12 months or intends to stay for more than 12 months. So an immigrant is somebody who has migrated outside the country. And so we also classified non-Ghanaians. And they were persons who are not Ghanaian by birth or naturalization. Our methodology was simple. We just took data mainly from the 2021 PHC, and we supported with some information from the two latest ones, the 2000 and 2010 population census. We also sourced information from some other studies that have been done either by the GSS or some researchers. The main variables that we were interested in on international migration were derived from the section of the census that was on nationality, birthplace, and place of residence. From nationality, we were able to determine who was a Ghanaian and who was not a Ghanaian. And the combination of birthplace and the place of residence, the place where you were enumerated, enabled us to classify Ghanaians into migrants and non-migrants. Regarding external migration, we mainly focused on a section on the questionnaire which was on emigration. So results. According to the 2021 Population and Housing Census, about a third of Ghanaians, about 30% of Ghanaians were classified as migrants. So somebody will ask, so what is the significance of that? I think something close to 30% indicates that Ghanaians are a little restless. We are a little mobile, so we, at any point in time, we find some Ghanaians who have moved out of their usual place of residence and they are living elsewhere. And so if we've not been hearing of a lot of strife between, natives and non-natives in the country, then we should count it as a blessing, because in some nations we hear of a lot of conflict between indigenous people and those who have moved in to settle in those areas. Thankfully, in Ghana, we don't hear much of that. By way of age distribution, we presented it in this picture. We call it the age pyramid, And the normal one has a very broad base, and then it tapers towards the top. But here you could see that there's a huge concentration of the population in the middle ages, between 15 and 34. So we could classify them as young adults, or to use the international definition, we can classify them as the youth. So we can say from this that Ghana is a youthful population. And it has its own blessings as well as curses. It becomes a blessing if you know how to use it and use it well. It becomes a curse if you don't know how to use it and you leave it to go either. So we always pray on the government to look carefully at what they do to the youthful population. Give them the training so that they can fend for themselves. By sex composition, majority of Ghanaians are females. Nearly 53% are females. So, men, we are in trouble. If we had to share them one by one, some of us will not get any partners. So, woe betide anyone who takes more than one. Where do Ghanaians live? I mean, in terms of rural and urban, I mean the migrants, where do they live? A greater proportion of them reside in urban, in rural areas compared to urban areas. A third of them and a little over 1/5 live in urban areas. So this should prick your mind. You see, anytime we think of migration, in the minds of many people, it is rural-urban migration. And we think that, you see, they are creating all the problems in the urban areas. But this is suggesting that more people move into the rural areas in Ghana than in the urban areas. What are they going to do? Well, maybe it is still kakra ibigenti. Why do people move? The migration, the reasons are there. About 36% of the migrants say they move to settle permanently elsewhere. And another quarter, about 25%, also move due to marriage and family reunification. So you see, if you consider movement to settle, you can think about the fact that it may involve a family, a man, a wife, and the children moving to settle. And that is 36%. And if another 25% said they moved for marriage and family reunification, then we can say safely that most movements in Ghana are family related. Very little of it, just about a quarter of it, is mainly for employment. I think we have to think about it seriously. We try to look at the sex differentials and the reasons why people move. And this slide is giving us an idea. So we have isolated reasons for employment, which is economic, and reasons for marriage and family related reunification, which is mainly social family. And for employment, we can see clearly that males dominate. The blue color represents males. They are more, about almost twice that of female. So we can say that men move mainly for the purpose of looking for employment in Ghana. Whereas if we come to the middle panel, the women move mainly for reasons that are related to marriage and family reunification. So you see, I didn't hear that. You see, our culture is such that during marriage, it is the woman who moves. And it is still pervasive. So if we like it, whether we like it or not, it is the women who will move for purposes of marriage. So the men will stay put and wait for the women to come. Maybe things may change with time, but for now, that is the situation. School attendance by migrant status. So we have the deep blue representing non-migrants and the light blue representing migrants. And you can see that a higher proportion of migrants have more than the non-migrants have attended school. They have received some level of education. And so we can say that education, in a sense, is a precursor of migration. And that is easily understandable. When people receive education up to a certain level, they become misfits in the place where they live because they cannot use their education to find jobs in those places. And so they have to move elsewhere to look for jobs. So with increasing education, more and more people will be compelled to leave. We want to compare those who move in and those who move out of their regions. And we can see that in about 6 regions, Greater Accra is easily leading, with the highest number of people who moved into that region. And there are other regions like Ashanti, Western, Bono East, and Western North, about 6 of them, and Bono, where the people who moved in, the in-migrants, were more than those who moved out. So we can say that for these regions, they gained population through migration. But for all the others, those who moved out were more than those who moved in. So we can say that those regions were losing population through migration. So we can observe that all the migrant receiving regions are found in the south. So one would expect that then, why is Eastern and Central region not included in the pack? And that is something we have not. Central region, it has been a perennial out-migration area. Conditions in many parts of Central region are difficult. So it has been sending people out of the region over a very long period. It is Eastern region which has joined the fray not too long ago. It is only in the last 2 censuses that Eastern region started posting information showing that people were moving out of the region more than they are moving in. We are still trying to find answers to that. Why? But we know that until very recently, Eastern region hosted a number of industries which were initiated during the Nkrumah period. The March factory in Kade and some other factories, several of them in Nsawam, all of which have folded up. And we believe that, it is the effect of these things which we are now experiencing in the Eastern region currently. Good. So there's this simple dichotomy. The southern regions are receiving people through migration, which means they are better endowed. And the northern regions in the north, are sending out people because they are not so well endowed with natural resources. Here, this slide is a little technical. It presents information on net migration rates and effectiveness ratio. Net migration is just the balance between in-migration and out-migration. If you strike the balance and it is positive, then it means that region is receiving more people into it. If it is negative, then it means it is sending more people out of the region. And using that alone, about 10 of the regions are out migrating regions, sending people out. And only 6 are in migration regions, receiving people through migration. But you could see that if you come to the tail end, the Volta region, Upper East and Upper West, the magnitude is very, very high. And so if that continues, it will not bode very well for those regions. They may be forced at certain point in time to import people into those areas to help develop those regions. Then the other one, the migration effectiveness ratio. All what it is saying is that how do the individual regions contribute to the redistribution of population within the country. So again, the 6 countries that experience positive net migration, they also experience positive migration effectiveness ratio, with Greater Accra showing the highest. So it is 58.9. So this one looks at how busy are the borders of the individual countries. So it looks at the gross turnover, both those who are moving in and those who are moving out, and puts them together and gives you a figure, the gross turnover. So the migration effectiveness ratio is just the ratio of the net migration over the gross turnover. So if you do this calculation and you get 100, for example, and it is positive, then it means that country, that region, is just receiving migrants. It does not send anybody out. And if it is 100 and it is negative, then it means it is only sending people out of the region, but not receiving anybody into the region. You see, so it is important to bring in the migration effectiveness ratio, because if you rely only on the net migration, it does not give the picture very well. For example, if you look at Western and Ashanti, you could see that with respect to net migration, Western posted a higher figure than Ashanti. But with migration effectiveness ratio, Ashanti has posted something higher than Western, which means when it comes to redistribution of population, Ashanti is doing more, is contributing more than Western region. It is important to look at where we are coming from and where we are going. So we are looking at trends in migration. And we can see that between 2010 and 2021, there was a slight decline in the number of migrants in the country. We've been thinking very hard to try to see what could have resulted in that. And the only thing we can put our fingers on for now is the COVID. Because just before the census, we had a COVID lockdown in some parts of the country. And although the lockdown had been lifted, we know that during the COVID, the panic was such that a large number of people moved into their home areas because they feared that they could be locked down in where they are living. There become a time when they want to go into their home regions, but they will be locked down. So we saw trucks that were carrying people into these areas. We are not sure whether they still remain in those areas or they returned to their former places of residence. So that is the only reason that we can give there. Otherwise, beginning from 1960, every year, the proportion or the number of migrants has been in the ascendancy. We are relating migration to urbanization here. And Ghana's urban growth comes from about 2 or 3 main sources. It may come from certain small settlements, growing to attain a certain level of population, and so they become urban. It can also be as a result of the people in those areas giving birth rate. But it can also be because of people moving into those areas. So we believe that the steady increase in the proportion of people in Ghana living in migrants, part of it could be attributed to urbanization. Because if you look at the literature, some of the towns, some of the urban areas posted growth rates of Greater Accra, for example, at a certain point in time, it was 7-point-something%. And the latest one was about 4.4%. If you compare that to the growth rate, the population growth rate of the country of about 2.4, 2.5%, then you could see that something is happening there. And the only thing we can put our fingers on is that other people have moved into those areas. So we say that migration is also contributing to the rapid urbanization in this country. What this slide is showing us is just telling us the total population of children among the migrants. So the left side, the 29.4, was calculated based on the 30.8. It shows us the proportion of children in the country, the proportion of children 5 to 17 years in the country. And the 18% you are seeing are the migrant children out of the total number of children. So the 18.5 was calculated based on the base population of the total population of children. So it is saying that out of this number of children in the country, 18% are migrant children. Children between the ages 5 and 17. So you see, by our educational policy, these children are supposed to be, located somewhere and receiving education. So if they are compelled to move, then we should be looking at it seriously. But if they have moved for the purpose of education, then it is a good reason. We will look at that as we go along. Then among the migrant children, again, majority are females as compared to the males. And this is their age distribution. You can see that between the age groups 5 to 9, 10 to 14, and 15 to 17, they are almost evenly distributed. But the nature of the graph is not showing it very well. I think the left one and the right one should be a little closer, in height to the one in the middle. We tried to change this, but somehow it wouldn't change. So we could see that around 30% evenly distributed in the age groups. So by sex, we can see that in the age group 5 to 9, males dominate. Whereas in the total population, females dominate, the total child population, child migrant population. And in the 10 to 14, Again, it's even. It is strange. It is even. And then in the 15 to 17 age bracket, the females again are more than the males. So that is the nature or the characteristics of the migrant children that was observed in the census. And some of the children are working. About 96.9% said that they were not working. And it is stated here that population outside labor force. So it may be they were all schooling. So they were outside the labor force. But a certain proportion of them said they were working. So, and out of that proportion, we had 2.3% who were actually working during the census period. And just 0.8% were not working during the census period. So the proportion of the children, migrant children who were working, was just about 3.1%. If you add the 0.8 to the 2.3%, you get that figure. So they punched their chest and said that they were working. But then 0.8%, just about 1% of them were not working during the census period, 1 week before the census. So we see, we don't know why the 3.1% are working when somebody should be taking care of them. And they are not at home as well. So it has its own policy implications. So the 3.1 who are working, what are they doing? And we found out that majority of them are into agriculture-related activities. And these proportions are, say, they are in services and other elementary occupations. So if children are in services, you will ask, what kind of services are they providing? So I may presume that all the Kayayis are in this category of the children who are providing services. Then there are non-Ghanaians. And this graph shows that there has been a decline in the number of non-Ghanaian population that is in the country between 2010 and 2021. Whereas in 2010 we had close to 400,000. In 2021 we had just close to 300,000 who were non-Ghanaians. So the number has gone down. So we ask why. But the census does not provide us the answer. So we can only conjecture. And to add to what the Ghana, the GS, Professor Nim said, these are some of the issues which call for more surveys so that we'll be able to unwrap some of, or add meat to some of these things that are emerging out of the census. Where did the non-Ghanaians come from? And we observed that the higher proportion of them came from Nigeria, Togo, Niger, and Burkina Faso. We can understand Togo and Burkina Faso, but why Nigeria, which is very far away? Why Niger, which is very far away? Why have they surpassed Togo and Burkina Faso, for example? Well, there are historical reasons to all these things. In 1960, there was a study in the markets in Accra, and the study observed that 60% of the traders in the market were non-Ghanaians. In those days, the sale of timber, the sale of yam, the sale of maize, these were mainly the preserve of non-Ghanaians, the Gao people. It is only very recently that Ghanaians have taken over these areas. So it is not strange that we see people from some of these areas. So there's a historical antecedent, to what we are observing here. So that explains why we get people from Nigeria, more people from Nigeria than from, say, Cote d'Ivoire and Benin. Language may also play a role in this. We don't share the same national language with Cote d'Ivoire, so it could be a barrier. But outside Africa, Asia is performing very, very well. Non-Ghanaians in Ghana, and they are leading. So that one is obvious. I don't need to tell you who they are. So it means that we must not sleep with all our eyes closed. Otherwise, we may be overtaken by events. So the non-Ghanaians, what are they doing here? And about 3 in 4 of them, 76%, are concentrated in 3 occupations only. And these are services and sales, skilled agricultural, forestry and fishing, and craft and related trades. So one can say that the non-Ghanaians are found in what we term as easy entry jobs. You see, they are not so much as competing with you in the teaching field, in the nursing area, and in all those areas. These are easy entry jobs which do not require so much skills to enter into them. But if it is easy entry, then it is free for all, you see. Then it means everybody can enter into it. So if non-nationals take over everything there, and then it becomes a powder keg. So that is one area that, as a nation, we must also, open our eyes and look at them very carefully, because it can trigger anything. We must not lose sight of the skirmishes that have taken place between Ghanaian traders and Nigerian traders in Accra and Kumasi not too long ago. You see, they are mild, but who knows? They can escalate if care is not taken. So that, as it were, we try to put a cap on them. So don't let us sleep with all our eyes closed. So the employment status of the non-Ghanaians tells another story. Majority of them are self-employed without employees, but about 7% are self-employed with employees. We would wish that majority of them are self-employed with employees, so that their being in Ghana will open more job avenues for our young people. It looks very small, 6.6%. But compared to Ghanaians, the non-migrants who are self-employed with employees, this is slightly higher. That means they are doing better than our compatriots. So somehow, they are helping the economy. Where do we find them? The employment sectors in which we find the non-Ghanaians. Overwhelming majority are in the informal sector. And another sizable proportion are in the private formal sector. Less than 2% are in public sector, government, And I have every reason to believe that this could be highly trained non-Ghanaians who are doing some important services in the country. Otherwise, they cannot come and take places where Ghanaians, which could be occupied by Ghanaians. Then those Ghanaians who have moved out of the country, this too has increased a little between 2010 and 2021. Whereas in 2010, the census captured 250,624. It has increased to 289,531 Ghanaians who are moving out. So I want to draw attention to this. We have just come from slides that are talking about non-Ghanaians, which tells us that as a nation, we are receiving migrants. And here we are talking about Ghanaians who are moving out of the country. And the number seems to be going up. So in one breath, we receive migrants. In another breath, Ghana is sending out migrants. And we hear in the news stories of Nigerians who have been, caught, and they were holding Ghanaian passports. And that tells you that they came into Ghana, settled here, and find means to get Ghanaian passport. That means they use Ghana as a transit point. So in one breath, Ghana is a sending country, it is a receiving country, and a transit country. So you see, as a government, if you want to come out with policies to try to contain the situation, where do you start from? And where do you end? So the census has only come out with these facts. We need surveys to go into it in depth so that we can come out with the nitty-gritties and the real reason behind it, and that will inform government to come out with policies. The emigrants, this is their age pyramid, and it is not very different from that of the migrants who have come into the country. So it's like one draw, It's like they are only coming to replace Ghanaians who have left, because they fall into about the same age bracket. So as long as there are Ghanaians who are moving out, you will get people from the country that are not doing very well to come and fill in the place. Ubi mpa, ubi pe. Where did people move from? Which regions are sending people more outside the country? And the two regions, Greater Accra and Ashanti alone, send more than half of the emigrants to other countries, where Accra is 26.9, about the same proportion, and Ashanti is 26.8. So, but I want to draw attention to something here. These two regions are also receiving regions. So I believe that what is going on is what we refer to as stepwise migration. If you are going to go out, you cannot get your passport, you cannot get your connections when you are living in Ochim Beriadin. You have to come to the cities so that you'll be able to make the necessary connections, so that you'll be able to get your passports, so that you'll be able to get your whatever. So Greater Accra and Kumasi and Ashanti, perhaps they are serving as transit points. People move from elsewhere, they settle in these areas for a brief period, and then pam, they jump outside the country. Which regions are sending people most? And it's still Greater Accra, followed by Ashanti, and then Western region. So, now these are the three regions which contain the three cities in the country. So it may have something to do with, these cities. They come, settle in the cities before they move out of the country. So stepwise migration, it's something that could be going on. In 1969, Caldwell observed it, and I think it is still working even now. When Ghanaians leave, where do they go? And interestingly, most Ghanaians, when they leave, their destination is in Europe. About 37.6%. And then North America, the Americas, North and South America and the Caribbeans. And then other African countries outside the ECOWAS. So you see, if they are going for greener pastures, then it means they will go to the place where the pasture is actually green. They won't go to where the pasture is parched, so that they won't get anything to eat. Why do people emigrate from the country? And see, about 3/4 of them said they went for employment reasons. But a reasonable proportion, about 15%, said they went for education and training. So in the 60s, that was the most important thing why people were going out. And government was sending our people to go out and train because we needed skilled personnel to work in our new ministries and departments that we have created as a new independent country. So the government was supporting a lot of it. But these days, that proportion has come down, and people are migrating, independently to go and look for greener patches, to go and look for employment. Good. So, what can we make out of the presentation so far? Our key findings are that, as I mentioned, number one, Ghana is currently a migrant sending, transiting, and receiving country. So we have to be very careful. And for that reason, it is one of the reasons, the need to undertake a national migration study is I think, well overdue. The last one was made how many years ago? Kofi? Almost 30 years ago. 33 years. Good. So we need to do another one. Greater Accra is the leading migrant destination region in the country, and it will continue to do that. So 10 regions out of the 16 lost population through migration, with the Volta region posting the highest. Female migrants mostly move due to marriage and family reunions, whereas males move for economic reasons. And the two main destinations for Ghanaian emigrants are Europe and the Americas. Migrant populations have a higher proportion of educated persons than the non-migrant population. And the non-Ghanaian population are mostly into sales and services and are also largely self-employed without employees. So that reminds me, when we started going into Nigeria, the Ghanaians went to start shoe shining. It was unknown in Nigeria. Ghanaians went there to introduce it, And it became very lucrative. And so they observed certain vantage points in Lagos. So very early in the morning, they would go and plant themselves there, and they were getting jobs like no man business. And they quickly, graduated from just shining shoes to become, mending shoes. So in Nigeria, they were called so bata. So bata. Bata means footwear in Yoruba. That was the name for the Shushan boys in Nigeria. And with time, the other migrants from Nigeria who had come to Lagos fought with the Ghanaians over territory. The Hausas who had come to the south, they fought for 3 days, they were fighting. A fight between Ghanaian migrants and these Nigerians. So it was terrible. And so the radio people, they reported that the Ghanaians, so how? The mild Ghanaian, the Ghanaian who is known to be very calm, where did they get all that strength to match up with the Nigerians? And it was explained that when they woke up in the morning, Ubu, now washe, now a pie, bu ship pie. Bu is they drink alcohol. Shit, they burn weed. And pie, they pie drugs. So they didn't see what they were doing. So they were able to confront Ubu washing pie. And the age of immigrant population peaks at 25 to 39 years. Very economically active age bracket. So that should sound a warning to us. So I want to draw attention to 2 key areas. The fact that Ghana is 3 things at the same time is just calling for a study on migration, which is long overdue. So that is what we will throw out there. And the fact that the migrants, both those internal migrants and those who have come in, enter into the easy entry jobs, areas which can be occupied by everybody. The Nigeria story should tell us that if we are not careful and the Ghanaian youth feel that people have come to take over jobs they could easily do, it can spell doom for us. So I will end with this. These are 2 areas where, as a nation, we must look at very carefully. Thank you very much.
Please, you can do it better. Prof, thank you very much. And I must confess, this is also a technical presentation. Migration, what is migration? What is emigration? I guess Prof would have asked you a question concerning this. So what have you learned from all this presentation? I know you have quite a number of questions, but then we need to have a discussion to get a better understanding and clarification of issues. Then the questions can come. So I call on Professor Stephen Owusu Kwanche to lead the discussions.
I hope you can see me. You say, if you are height challenged, you should always make arrangements to lift you a little higher. But thank you very much, Madam Chair, the government statistician and his deputy. I rep who is here, my colleague at the far end, and everybody who is here. No, I'm fine. Once they can see my head, that's fine. Otherwise, when we leave here, that will be the publication. Okay. Now, on a more serious note, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so. Why are these people disturbing me like this? Thank you very much. You see, at times certain challenges are also helpful. The presenter of the main report didn't get this applause, because he didn't need to stand on anything. I must begin by saying how excited I am to be called upon to discuss this comprehensive report, which was written and led by somebody who is an experienced demographer and a migrant. So all the experiences he was sharing about Nigeria, Bushe, Pi, and all that, I think these are eyewitness accounts. So, Prof. Nefi, thank you very much for the presentation. I've worked with you for a long time, so I know wherever he has moved to. So, anyway, this publication, I think I must commend the Ghana Statistical Service and their allies and partners for keeping to their word and publishing the outcome of the census for 2021 in series. And this one is so important because migration normally does not receive this kind of attention because of data constraints, as he himself mentioned. So my discussion is just going to highlight on the key findings. But before that, by way of introduction, I want to emphasize some of the points that they made to put the presentation in its context. There is not going to be a second presentation. The lawyers will tell you that there is always the letter and the spirit. And so I'll take it that he has presented the letter. Of course, he tried to go behind the letter and tell us all the spirit behind it. But I will dwell more on the spirit as I was spoken to by the Holy Spirit. So the report presents migration as an important component of population change, and I endorse it. And to emphasize the point that for all the three components of population change, this is the one that is unnatural. Fertility, you don't decide to be born, but you are born. Death, you don't want to die, but death comes. And I always say that nobody plans his life and makes room for death. But whether you make room for it or not, death will find a way in there. And so those two are natural. But migration is the unnatural one. That is when people themselves decide whether they want to move or otherwise. And so it is very, very important when we talk about population change. And that is why it is also heartwarming that the UN recommended that we should have questions on migration in our censuses to come out with some information for analysis to inform policy and decision making. But you see, as he himself acknowledged, the kind of questions that are accommodated in censuses are not adequate enough to help us unravel everything about migration as we understand it in the literature. But nonetheless, we still acknowledge migration as an important driver of socio-economic development of every country, including Ghana. And over the years, the evidence attests to the fact that migration has played a role. That is why when people talk about migration only in negative terms, it becomes worrying. It has both positive and negative aspects. And I dare say that if all of us are not migrants, about 95% of us are. And so that is why migration is very, very important. So it is about all of us. And so as we talk about it, don't you see it as an academic paper that is being presented, but take it as something that bothers about your own personal life and experiences. I see the report as highlighting so many things. It has definitional issues that have been presented. It highlights typologies of migration in terms of all the facets of it: internal, international, temporary to permanent, voluntary, involuntary, and at the same time differentiating, and that is very important, between the resourceful and non-resourceful migrants. And this is done in the context of who migrates. At times it is considered that it is only those who are rich who can migrate, but it's not only those who are rich. Even the poor yearns to migrate more than even the rich. And they have a way of networking and mobilizing resources to do so. And so it's not only for the rich. The report has 6 chapters made up of the introduction, which presents the background information and context, including the methodology, which he mentioned. And it describes migration in Ghana and gives a very vivid account of the historical perspective. And that is very, very interesting. If you don't know anything about migration in Ghana, when you pick that report, it tells you whatever has happened. Pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial, and even the contemporary times. And I think that is very wonderful. It also highlights some of the emerging issues, some of which were presented. The children dimension and all that are also there. Then it looks at some of the demographic and socioeconomic characteristics of migrants. It does an analysis on the patterns, trends, and differentials in migration, regional variation in migration relative to intra and inter-regional migration, the importance of migration for urbanization, as well as migration and living standards. I also found that there is an examination of the non-Ghanaian population, and that is quite good. It's very, very important that Ghana does not belong to only Ghanaians. We have non-Ghanaians. As we are also going out, they are also coming here, as he said. Then it talks about the destination countries, which also are very, very interesting. And I will have something there to talk about. We have the summary of key findings that have been presented. So, while I commend the Ghana Statistical Service and its partners for adding this to the number of important reports already published from the 2021 Population and Housing Census, I am going to pick some of the key findings and try to examine them within the context of the data that are available, such that you don't just take the numbers and run with them without understanding what is behind them. So, number one, Madam Chairperson, Prof. Nafi presented that we have about 29% of the Ghanaian population being migrant, and about 72 or 71% non-migrant. And I dare say that this reflects the census definition of who a migrant is, which is based on the differences between a person's place of birth and place of enumeration on census night. And here we describe it as a lifetime migrant or non-migrant. Again, as he himself admitted, obviously this kind of classification is limited and is unable to help us report truly how migratory the population is based on the restrictiveness of the census data. I am sure that if we were to do a specific migration survey to be able to ask all the relevant questions. We will have Ghanaians being more migratory than the 29% that he mentioned. Because you see, during census, you are asking questions whether where you are being enumerated is different from where you were born. And even where people are born is also a question that we need to answer. So people, they associate their places of birth with the most important locality in their area of birth. So you have all Ashantis who are in Accra saying that they were born in Kumasi. And all the Gombas in Kumasi saying that they were born in Tamale. Meanwhile, they have not even gone to Kumasi before. And so the place of birth in the census data is always a question that one needs to be careful about. As for where you are being enumerated, you are there, so it is known. So that is not a problem. And so it is a definitional issue, because migration goes beyond just lifetime migration. And as we well know also, in censuses there are some traditional leaders who canvass that people, their subjects, should come to their traditional settings to come and be enumerated so that they get the numbers. So if that happens in a more, maybe, I don't know, if people catch this kind of spirit of the call to come, and many go back, then definitely those who are known to be migrants themselves will be captured in the database as non-migrants. And so I am not too happy with this 28.9% of Ghana's population being migrant. And I think that he himself admits that it's a good question to ask because of the kind of data that we are using. Because the moment you go back to be enumerated, you lose your status as a migrant and you become a non-migrant. So it's the data that is telling us that you are not a migrant, but you yourself, you know you are a migrant. But by virtue of the fact that you happen to be where you were born, then you are disqualified as a migrant. So we need to use the data with this in mind. Now the other one is a higher proportion of migrants being female. I gave us the data 52.5% than male, 47.5%. And for me, this also signifies that migration is increasingly becoming feminized. So we are getting more and more women joining the migration fray. That is on the basis of the data that we have. In the 60s and early 70s, the migration literature had more males migrating in Ghana compared to females. But you can see that, the speeches that came talking about leaving no one behind. So the women don't want to be left behind when it comes to migration. And I asked a simple question, okay, we don't want to leave anyone behind. What about people who deliberately refuse to be taken along? What do you do to them? And Madam Chair said that we should drag them along. Madam Chair, the next key finding was about the proportion of the rural population and urban that is migrants. And the report indicates that we had a higher proportion of the rural population being migrants, 33.9% compared to the urban, 22.2%. And this is where I have some questions to ask. I find it so interesting because the report itself speaks clearly about the contribution of migration to the rapid urbanization in Ghana. So if migration is contributing to rapid urbanization in Ghana, then it should tell us that many of the urban residents are migrants. And so when you relate them to the total population in the urban area and then at the same time in the rural area, what do we have smaller percentage for the urban compared to the rural? So here I don't want anyone to go away with the understanding that those in the rural areas are more migratory. I don't think they are. But it happens that using census data, if majority of people or more people go back to where they were born, and obviously many of us were born in rural areas, it's only recently that where you were born has become urban. But truly you were born in a rural area. And so if you go there and then the numbers swell up relative to the rural population and you are getting higher numbers, then we have to be very careful the way we interpret those numbers. So we have to be very careful the way we go about it. So the analysis, as I see, relative to this one, may not reflect the reality on the ground, considering the current migration flows in the country that is acknowledged to be more from smaller towns to larger towns and to cities. And that is the factor of migration. And so I'm not saying the figures are wrong, they are not. But because of the kind of data we are using and the analysis we are doing, that is what I want you to take away, that you don't go about to say that the rural areas are more migratory than us. No, I don't think that is the case. Now, another area which is so important is the age pyramid of the migrant population that he presented, suggesting that the youth 15 to 34 years are more migratory. And that is true by the literature, because migration itself is selected by age. If you are a young person, youthful exuberance, what do you call it? You want to explore. And so you may not even have any objective to move, but your friends are going. And you don't want them to go and come and tell you that you are docile. So you also join. So people move at that age. And what we need to contextualize here is those who are moving, how equipped are they in terms of knowledge, skill development, entrepreneurial acumen, to be able to be ingenious and to contribute more in the development of the country. And that is what we've been talking about relative to the demographic dividend, because it's the youth that is having the potential, if well invested in, to be able to turn the economy around. And so the kind of youth that we have, if they are moving without skills that are employable, where are they going to find the jobs? And if you are not very careful and we don't guide the education, the skill training, and they are everywhere, then anything can mobilize them for different purposes. And that is why we say that if you are not very careful and you don't develop them into a dividend, they can be turned into a demographic bomb that can explode in our faces. I also find it interesting the reasons for migration, and these do not surprise us. For now, we spoke about the differences between males and females, where the females are more likely to move for marital reasons. And I think that that is to be situated in a cultural setting. We say that the man is the head. And so when the head is gone, if you don't join, you cannot have a living. And so that is fine. But what is interesting here is for economic purpose, for jobs, where we have the males going for employment purposes more than the females. And until now, when women's empowerment is beginning to catch up, previously we used to have the man as the breadwinner. And so when it comes to looking for a job, your wife will tell you that, my friend, move. If you don't move, there will be problem. So when you move, then you bring her. So it is trying to paint a picture of a cultural and economic setting that we have been since independence. Again, I also want to look at analysis of the migration trend. relative to the smaller number of migrants in 2021 compared to 2010. And here, I don't want to swallow it as it is, especially within the context of the data that we are using. It may suggest that Ghanaians were more migratory in 2010 than in 2021, which may not be the case. Again, when the assumption that many people also go to where they were born to be registered, depending on the variation of response to the score between 2010 and 2021, you are likely to have these differences happening. So it may not necessarily be the case that in 2021 we have more migrants than the case was in 2010. So each must be situated in its proper context. I wasn't surprised about the finding that Greater Accra is the most attractive region for migrants, attracting 1.4 million, almost 1.5 million immigrants, which was almost twice the number recorded in Ashanti region as the second most migrant attractive region in the country. And then he also showed the difference between those in the south and those who are in the northern half. Now, times two, when people are moving, they look at where there's the likelihood for having jobs. And most of these are based on perceptions. They perceive that when they come to Accra, life will be okay. Then they suddenly get to Accra and they find that their perceptions were not true. Now, what do? They are confronted with the dilemma. Do you go back? But if you go back, wouldn't they laugh at you? If you stay, what are you getting? So they weigh the two and decide that, well, maybe if others have made it here in Accra, I may also make it. And so they stay here. And that is why people watch films about migrants crossing the Middle East, the sea that is there, and they are drowning, and yet more are going. And when you interview them, they tell you that but some escape. So it is possible that I will not die. So that's the resilience some migrants have. And so they come to Accra, knowing very well that they may not have it as easy as they were having it in the villages. They also know that if they work every day in the place of origin, the amount of money they will receive cannot be compared to what they will earn if even they work one day in a month in Accra because of perceived wage differences. So all these account to why migrants choose certain regions that they take as their destination area. And over the years, natural resources have been distributed in such a way that those that have been identified in those days were more confined to the forest, middle belt, and the coastal areas where the markets were bigger. It is only recently that people are beginning to diversify where they are moving to Galamsey almost everywhere in the country. We pray that one day they will not find Galamsey resource under my bed. Because this day they don't even care what happens to you after they have dug the ground. And so now it's beginning to spread. And as more and more resources are identified and utilized in terms of their exploitation, I'm sure this pattern is likely to change going forward. One other thing that he talked about is the component of the migrants, that is the children component. And for me, that is a source of concern, especially when we have children as young as 5 years as migrants. But the census questions do not help us to differentiate between children who migrated with their parents or caregivers, as well as those who migrated on their own. If we were able to disentangle them and know the children who moved on their own and their ages, then we can begin to speak about issues that have to do with their vulnerability in terms of moving on their own, in terms of the challenges that they are likely to face relative to child and family support for them. And we had 31.5% of the child migrants being of age 5 to 9. I want to believe that many of these were with their caregivers. Otherwise, if a 5 to 9-year-old is moving and there are more, then definitely we have some policy issues to address. And we are aware that studies have also found migrants who have moved independent of their caregivers and their parents as young as 7, 8, 9. So that is there. But we need to be able to find out exactly how many they are in the census data, which we are unable to do because of the constraining factor of the data. Now, if we assume that many of these are independent child migrants, then there are issues pertaining to how we are able to address or realize some of the sustainable development goals. For example, goal 1 is talking about no poverty. At times I look at some of these goals and wonder why they chose some of these goals. No poverty. Are you sure we can get to a point where there's no poverty? Especially when we look at the situation in Africa. And one said that maybe they choose those days, especially the African one, 2063, when they know that by that time those who decided will not be around, and so you cannot ask them why they were not able to achieve it. But to be frank, can we have a society where there's no poverty? But well, let's try and help. But if you have more and more children who are migrating, then the question about attainment of this sustainable development goal should be carefully weighed, because as they go out, they don't have decent jobs to do, they don't have shelter, they become so vulnerable. Their reproductive health is also challenged. And if all these are happening to them, then this no poverty will be a challenge. Then the question of zero hunger, is just variation of the words. No poverty, zero hunger. All of them are the same. So no hunger. No hunger. At times there is food, but some are hungry. Depends on the distribution of the food and where you find yourself at any given point in time. And their exposure to the hazards of the environment will also bring in the issue of good health and well-being, which is the goal 3. Gender equality is also going to be in question. And we have quality education. Thankfully, when he compared the education of non-migrants and the migrants, we saw that the migrants relatively had a higher level of education compared to the non-migrants. Or better still, a higher proportion of the migrants had some education compared to the non-migrants. So we need to put this in that context and work towards addressing some of the possible challenges that this kind of migration and the composition of the migrant population is likely to challenge us. Madam Chair, the other one relates to migrant children who are working in all kinds of jobs. And Prof. Nafi mentioned that 48% of them are working in agriculture-related activities. Then service and sales, 22%. Now, one issue that comes up quite often is that when we see this, we are tempted to conclude that then there's child labor. But we have to be very careful when we speak about child labor in the context of Ghana. I am not endorsing child labor. And I shudder to caution that we need to be very careful the way we also let children engage in the work that is likely to have some kind of negative implications on their health and education. But let us see what kind of work, in what context. So if you are able to, 5 minutes. This woman is harassing my life. Thank you very much. So I'm saying that if we are able to tell what kind of work relative to the education, if we are able to relate them, then we'll be able to tell whether it is child labor or is part of our socialization practices in the country. Some of us, we were going to school, going to farm, doing everything, but nobody branded us as being in child labor. And if we were in child labor, we wouldn't be here presenting about this thing. So we need to be very careful the way we speak about child labor. A lot has been said about the non-migrant, non-Ghanaian population in Ghana. All I need to talk about here is that they are also competing in the area of private informal sector. And that is where the Ghanaian population is largely employed or engaged in. And so we need to look at it in the context of how we regulate our policies and programs to ensure that there is peaceful coexistence. And Prof. Nefi rightly mentioned that one. Then where they are coming from, they are coming from neighboring countries where in terms of security it's not better than here. And so if we are looking at it that way, then we have to also look at our security architecture to ensure that we manage the situation in such a way that we don't have those who shouldn't be here coming in to create destabilizing situations for us. We have our own problems that we are trying to solve, so they shouldn't come and disturb us too much. You also talked about the immigrant population being also useful. I mean, that is also to be expected. Then one other thing that I need to also maybe on a lighter note, he mentioned that majority of them who are coming, the immigrants, those who are going out, are going to Europe, America, and all those places. Historically, that has been the case. But you see, we need to also be asking questions. These questions were asked to the households where they have left. And I believe that, I am thinking that some of them want to associate their out-migrant household members with popular destination areas. So if you are in Europe, that is fine. If you are in America, that is fine. But if you are in Togo, I don't think that they will be happy with you. And so in our surveys, we need to also find a way to get to know exactly where these are. Otherwise, we may be thinking, some of them even don't know where they are. Because after they have gone, they move on. And because of the fact that they don't want to be traced by forces of evil, they don't even tell them where they are. The report makes important conclusions that I think are worth reflecting and putting an emphasis on. So one, migration is still important in the development discourse in Ghana. And since all of us are migrants, I think you agree with me. People will continue to move within Ghana and to reflect their response to the varying degrees of attraction of areas or regions based on their perceived resource endowment and utilization status or perception of job provision opportunities. The next one is that Ghanaians will continue to move out to other countries and receive other non-nationals within the ECOWAS sub-region, and therefore policies and legislation should reflect these developments. Finally, and most importantly, and you also mentioned it, I need to emphasize it, there is need for regular national migration specific service to generate data that are more helpful in bringing out detailed analysis on the different dimensions of migration, and not to rely on lifetime migration alone, which clearly, as we have all come to terms with, could mask many of the important aspects of the migration discourse. So ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chair, I'm being driven away from here, so thank you very much.
Prof, thank you very much. Really, the 5 minutes, you worked into the 5 minutes. Thank you very much. I know we will have some nagging questions. We are giving ourselves 10 minutes. If there are questions, please come up with your questions. Anyone with questions, clarification? Okay.
Okay. Thank you. I want to first commend GSS and the professors for bringing the reports to our level. I have two quick questions and a half. The first one is a clarification. I want to find out what informed the increase of the duration in the definition of who is a migrant from 6 months to 12 months. Because that is very significant. That's my first question. My second one is when you look at the slide on the children, especially the working, where we have 96.9 being out of the labor force, 2.3 working, and 0.8 unemployed. I want to find out what is the meaning of that unemployed for children. Because like Professor indicated, most of the children are expected to migrate with their parents or guidance. And at that age, if they are not working and we are capturing that statistics, what does that mean? And then my third question is, I've seen that the proportion of migrants, as we have more female migrants than males. Then Prof mentioned briefly about characteristics including the female porters, popularly called KIA. I was expecting that there will be more information on the KIA presence, in the sense that there has been increased movement of the females from the northern sector to the southern sector for economic reasons. So I didn't see much about this phenomenon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We need to know who you are, so kindly, when you ask your questions, kindly let us know.
My name is Mutar Guru. I work for United Nations Population Fund.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then we'll please that we are taking about 5 questions and then one person to a question in order for us to wrap up fast. Doc.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. Madam Chair, this has been very useful, breaking it down to absorbable units. I have really benefited. I just want to, take it just one issue. It has numerous policy benefits, policy implications, but I want to look at it from the perspective of decentralization, rural development. A number of objectives were set when we decided, especially in 1988, to really decentralize. One of the major policy objectives was to decongest Accra, and send development closer to the people. And part of the objective was also to make sure that people do not migrate. Of course, there's no way you can prevent people from migrating because, people have moved since creation. But to stem that tide and make sure that at least we stay closer and enjoy the benefit. If you look at the 10 regions that Prof. Anevi related to as sending out people, I think it will be interesting for policymakers to want to figure out what has been the major impact of government interventions, policies, programs, numerous policies that are geared towards enhancing the development of those areas. and then let's stay there. So that's something that perhaps the GSS, maybe our regional officers, may want to take these things up and look at the regional, dimensions of this and see how these things can help the regional coordinating directors and regional ministers to want to focus on the reasons. I know studies have actually been undertaken on why people have moved in those regions, etc. But can we continue doing that? I'm sure, Chief Director Interior, we should be interested in why these movements and what is this that is happening, that everybody want to move to Accra, and major analysis of what it is that government policies and programs have done by way of their impact. That's something that I'm sure we will have to take on going forward. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Doc. Okay. Any more questions, please? Kindly use the mic.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Prof. My name is Gilbert Akomoni from the Center for Migration Studies, a PhD fellow. I want to have like a small perspective from either Prof. Nefi or Prof. Kwanche. We recognize that migration is not cheap, be it rural or international. And therefore, people would migrate short distances, as he said. But I want to compare the sort of migration that the PHC had captured and to recognize whether maybe those who are migrating, who fall between the youth, are migrating because they are using the migration as a mitigation strategy for which they migrate, comparing the current economy and their current circumstances. Is there a nexus, or is there something that is making people move despite the fact that it is expensive and there is more complaints about not having enough funds for the youth? Thank you.
Any more, please? That's the last one for us.
Thank you very much. My name is Judy Puplampu. I'm a PhD student population studies and an intern with GSS. My quick question is on one of the key findings presented by Professor Anefi, number 6 specifically, in which migrant and non-migrant populations were being compared in terms of their educational attainment. So I just wanted further clarification on the migrant and non-migrant comparison. Thank you.
Please, the last one.
Hello. My name is Johnson Ayalome, Ghana Statistical Service. During the presentation, we saw that the dominant reasons for migration is actually family reasons. I tempted to think, can we really explore the fact that that issue rather is induced to the extent that the main reason or the driving force or the leading force could be employment or economic reasons, and based on that the family reasons may come. So that policy perspective, if we were to tackle employment or economic issues, then the family reasons that were driving the migration itself could be solved. And then the second issue will be, there have been concerns that if migration were to stop, that in itself will have implication for poverty. People believe that movement to the global north, it's a key reason for tackling poverty that is recorded in the global south. Can we, in an analytical report that we are calling for, can we analyze whether the inter-regional movement in itself can solve the regional poverty, or regional level poverty? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've been able to work within our 10 minutes. I come to the high table for us to respond to the questions asked.
Okay. By the de facto, you are interviewed wherever you are encountered, at the place where you are encountered. But by the de jure, you are related to your usual place of residence, by law. So, but this one was de facto. The current census was de facto. You were interviewed wherever you were encountered. So you see the type of information that will come out from these two types of censuses will be different. So being de facto, the information we have, or the quantum of people regarded as migrants that came out of the census are considered as the migrant stock. So some of them, or we call them, as Prof. Kwanti mentioned, lifetime migrants, and it does not allow you to actually show too many differences. So if you go into the details, the number that you got out of the de facto could change. Yeah, so that is that. But somebody asked what informed the increase in the duration of stay. I think that one can be answered by GSS. So I will leave that to you. And then the working children. Somebody wanted to find out what the unemployed children there actually meant. You see, there were a series of questions which sought to find out whether somebody was working or not working. So the question was, in the last 7 days to the census, did you work? So if the person said yes, then he is employed. If the person said no, so if a child answers no, some field officer could put the child down as unemployed. So the unemployment is with reference to a reference period. Within that period, did you work? So I believe that there were some children who said, well, they have been doing some work, but within that reference period, they were not working, and so they were captured as unemployed. Somebody wanted more information on the Kayaye. The Kayaye just came in passing. I was only conjecturing. The census did not capture any information on the Kayaye. So I was just saying that if there are more females migrants than the male migrant, child migrants, then perhaps some of them could be some of the Kayaye that we see on the street. So what I said is not what was captured by the census per se, but I'm only conjecturing that if the female numbers or proportion is increasing, the children, then some of them could be those girls who are found out there in the street. So the census cannot give us any answer specifically on the Kaya. I think, Doctor, your contribution was just a contribution. Yeah, so, and we all agree with you that we need to decongest Accra. But as to how to do it is the question. But with so many years of decentralization, that was what we were hoping for. Maybe some of the industries would have moved from Accra Tema to some of these areas so that they would attract the young men who move into Accra looking for jobs. But sometimes you have to follow these policies with deliberate action before it can take effect. So there are actions like the government can deliberately cite certain industries, okay, and or come out with conditions. The government can only do what we refer to as enabling conditions. You establish enabling conditions and relate them to the rural areas where people can go and set up industries which will attract people. We have the growth pole model. You deliberately decide to go to a place, establish certain things there, not just industries, but then you give the place things that are needed, electricity, water, and all these necessary things. And for all you know, it will attract people to all those areas. So those are some of the initiatives that government can initiate, and then the individuals can also follow suit. Why do some people move in spite of the cost of migration? I think Prof. Kwanche made allusion to that. It is the same thing as, why do hundreds of people die crossing the Mediterranean, but every day people are still making attempts to cross? Nobody knows. I think there is a god of migration, so that if it enters certain individuals, nothing can stop them from migrating, And sometimes it is mindset. It is like giving a dog a bad name and then hanging it. Some years back, as I met a young man, a friend of mine was talking to a young man, and the young man said, the pay structure in Ghana is too bad. And so he cannot stay in Ghana and receive that meager salary. The next day he was on the plane and he's now living outside. And the man he was talking to said, are you telling me that we cannot get anybody in Ghana here who is receiving a salary of $700? He swore heaven and earth that he would never believe that there was a Ghanaian receiving $700, and the person who was talking to him was the same person who was receiving $700. But he wouldn't believe it. He had made up his mind, and nothing could stop him. Give a dog a bad name and hang it. So when some people make up their mind, nothing stops them, and they go based on perception, as Prof. Kwanche said. The reason why they want to go to A or B may not be real, but they have perceived it in their mind that that place, the streets are paved with gold, and all the trees, the leaves are golden leaves. So he would just go and stand under one tree, and when one fall, he would catch it and then run back to Ghana with a golden leaf. And there's no place like that in the world. But people, that is human nature. Nothing can stop it. Migrant and non-migrant educational differences. I find it difficult to understand what the questioner really wanted to know, but that is what the data shows. that some migrants are a higher proportion, I wouldn't say they are better educated, but a higher proportion of the migrants had attended school, had received some education than non-migrants. So that is what the data is saying. We need to go into the details before we'll be able to understand why it is like that. But thinking about it, what came into my mind is that since with all our development, there are certain categories of education. We have the primary, secondary, and then the tertiary. It is only the primary which is about universal, spread almost everywhere in the country. But the moment you want to receive secondary and tertiary education, some or many people will have to move from their usual places of residence, and these people could be categorized as migrants. Somebody's problem was that if migration could be solved by tackling the problem of employment, if you give everybody employment, will everybody stop migrating? Just like the former question. There are some people who are sad that if you give them, you make them chief executives in their own towns, they will leave. Yes, they feel that they have to move somewhere. And you see, in migration studies, there is always a very small proportion whose reasons are, freak in a way. You will get those majority who are doing that because of economic reasons. You will get a sizable proportion who are doing it because of family reasons. But there are some other reasons which may not sit in your own mind. I did my study, and I met a middle-aged woman. She was 54, and she was in Abidjan, and whilst everybody was saying that they moved to Abidjan to go and look for money, this woman said she married a prominent chief in the Brahafo area, and they got divorced. And the tradition is that if a prominent chief divorces you, no other person, no other subject of that prominent chief can marry you. See, so you can imagine. So he said she had to move. So the reasons are many and varied. So whatever you do, you will get some people who will move.
Thank you very much, Prof.
The education that you asked about the migrants and non-migrants, it is not putting the population together as total. Among the migrants, 77%. So if you take in absolute numbers, it will not be anywhere near the non-migrants, but their numbers will be huge, right? But when you take among the migrants, 80-something of them had received some form of education, and among the non-migrants, 77%. And so it was not the totality and putting the two together. So it's among those areas. And the one that talked about whether it's a coping strategy. In the census, just as we talked about, we don't have enough time to delve in what the reason was it to be able to afford whether you didn't have some food to eat, or maybe sending somebody out to bring returns and other things in there. And so specifically, have you been out? And then other things. But one of the things I also challenge the team that you might also look at is that don't only lose your lifetime migrants, but also compare 5 years ago where you lived. Because when you combine the 5 years ago, whether you're a lifetime migrant and non-migrant, we should be able to sift out and get us more information about those people who have moved within the country. Thank you.
Mr. Odejebi, can you respond to the 12 months first, please?
Okay. Right. There was a question on. Okay, let me. There was a question on why we use 12 months as the minimum duration of stay to qualify one as a migrant. Yes, even though we conducted a census in Ghana, but we've been guided by the UN principles and recommendation for conducting censuses. So our questions relating to the duration of stay, we pick from the UN principles and recommendation, so that all countries conducting that round of censuses will use the same questions. Again, even though we say 12 months, but those who have stayed at a place less than 12 months, but then have the intention to stay for a longer period are also qualified to be considered as migrants. So that is how we ask the questions and the responses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, we'll call upon you to give us the closing remarks. I don't know if you will sit here.
Thank you. I'll use Professor's physically challenged board and give my closing remarks. All too soon, we've come to almost the tail end of the program. And I'm excited to be part of it because I've learned so many things from the presentations and the discussions and the questions that were asked. If we won't take anything home at all, we could have a conversation around Accra being the leading migrant destination. Ghana is currently a migrant sending, transiting, and receiving country. We also had a conversation around the child migrants engaged in agriculture and sales and services. And if we say migrant children aged between 5 and 17 constitute 15% of the total population of migrants, I think that we have to have a policy conversation around it and see how best we address some of the challenges arising thereof. I guess that we've spent a lot of time here and will not waste too much time. My singular duty is to also launch the report. So I think that we should all stand whilst we launch this document. Yeah, so I have the singular honor to launch the thematic report on migration today, the 9th of March 2023. Duly launched. Thank you.
So we'll call upon Reverend Udro Dintra to give us the closing prayer.
Thank you. Shall we please be outstanding as we say a prayer? Let us pray. Father, thank you for a successful release of this all-important report. We want to say thank you for how far you have brought us, even as an institution, for the strength and the wisdom to have come up with all these reports. We commit even the yet remaining reports to be published into thy hand. Your word says that you who is able to keep that which we commit you against that day, you are able to keep all that is yet to be done. We relate this report to your word in Proverbs 27:23 that says that we should be diligent to know the state of the flock, in this case the population, and to look well to thy heads. Lord, migration as a component of the population, there is a good revelation, findings that, Lord, we ask that it will be put to proper use. We pray that we will not just be hearers, but will be users of this report. That will go a long way to help get solutions to the challenges that we face as a nation in terms of irregular migration, that this report will be used for the benefit of the positive effect of migration in terms of remittances and other social returns. We thank you for everyone that came to observe this report. Thank you for the people that you used to bring out this report. We commit ourselves to you even as we go back, asking that your presence will be with us. May you bring us again another time for yet another release. For all that you have done for us as an institution, as a nation, we say thank you. In the mighty name of Jesus, Lord, we have prayed, even with thanksgiving. Amen. Please be seated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I also want to take this opportunity to express our appreciation to the high table for being there for us during our lunch and all others. We are grateful for your presence here. Thank you very much for coming.